The session objectives: learn how TMG protects users, highlight the value of TMG as a secure web gateway, and we'll go into the overview of the features in SP1. Just as a show of hands, who's got TMG deployed in their environment today? Well, that's pretty good. Put your hand up if you've got ISA 2006. A bit more. ISA 2004. Yep. Anybody got ISA 2000? One. Yeah, that's, I present this session quite often and in multiple countries, and that's probably about the percentages that I get. And when I ask people why they're still running, ISA 2000, 2004, 2006, I get the answer, well, because it just works. As a forward proxy, it just works, it does its job. However, as we go through today, you'll learn, ISA is a little bit outdated with some of its technologies and its capabilities. And I guess that's really the key takeaway, is that what we've added into TMG is comprehensive protection. We've added the capabilities that enable you to consolidate malware, URL filtering, and so forth. We've added that into TMG. So we're going to look at those. We're also look at how you can consolidate and simplify that infrastructure. Just to put things into perspective, this is probably not new news to you. Users like to click things. Users can't determine whether it's good or bad. And in some perspectives, with a lot of the exploits going on with JavaScript and so forth, a user could go to a valid site, but it could be the ad server that's compromised that could be throwing that up. There's a problem at the moment with some script with our friends at Google, and you can go to a site and through one of their ad servers compromised, it'll pop a dialogue and so forth. And so your computer's not clean. Do you want to click on it? And that's a whole new class of malware that's starting. So we've got malware, we've got phishing, compromised sites, drive-by scripts, and so forth. So we really need to have multiple controls to be able to protect our users. With an ISA deployment, and in most deployments, what you typically have is multiple technologies. So you might have a proxy, then you'll have a malware offload, or you might have another product for URL filtering. Lots of technologies there, lots of expense to the business. What we're going to work through with TMG is how we've consolidated that. Hence the name of the title of the deck, the 4 layers of protection in TMG. In TMG, we've added URL filtering, the ability to do category-based URL filtering, and we're going to go in depth into each one of these and do a demo in these. We've added anti-malware, so we've put the Microsoft AV engine into the stream so we can use that. We've also added the intrusion prevention system, which we'll talk about, which is there to provide you the capability to, if you can't get around to patch all your machines, you can block exploits at the gateway for Microsoft vulnerabilities, and we'll work through that. And finally, the ability to inspect inside HTTPS traffic. That's a can of worms. That's a quite interesting discussion. We have the capability of being able to do that, whether you would want to do that. There's a few, you may have seen on the title, I'm a CISSP, and part of our charter is to, moral and ethics security controls. There are some interesting ethics when you start dealing with HTTPS inspection and the information that you can get off the wire, and shouldn't you have the access to that information. But we can talk about that when we get to the HTTPS inspection. So we have the 4 layers of web protection. Let's start with layer 1, malware inspection. Again, it's probably not new to you. Why will you put malware at the gateway? Because not every device in your network has an up-to-date or has an AV client. So, and also you want to protect and defend the malware as close to the edge as you can. Get it, not get it in the network. That's why you do cloud-based mail filtering and so forth. The same with this. You basically want to have a barrier at the edge, and also from a good security architecture perspective, you'd have multiple layers. So you would also have your host-based AV, maybe a server-based AV, but also you have your AV out in the edge. From a malware protection perspective, it's quite straightforward. This isn't new technology. We've just added it into TMG. Basically, what you have is we have a new capability in TMG called the Windows, the Update Center, and that goes out and gets the updates at whatever interval you set, and it enables the engine on TMG. So the admin has the capability to configure, and we'll go through and I'll show you the configuration options. So you can do some configuration of what you want to scan, how you want it to scan it, what you want to block and so forth. There's also a different experience to the users. Obviously latent or traffic that's suffers from latency, such as video traffic and so forth. We treat that differently than what we would normal traffic. And as I mentioned, we have the integrated into Windows Update from the AV perspective. Now, my machine is still hammering the disk, but we'll give it a try. So what I'm actually running on this machine, I'm just going to have fun with the resolution. Is this lab. This is the Business Ready Security Lab. You can download a previous version that has the TMG bits on the Microsoft website. Version C is going to be out probably within the month. Basically, if you're doing anything with Forefront technology, it's a really good lab to download because it comes pre-configured. You need a fairly grunty machine to run it. This has got 16 gigs of RAM. It seems to run it fine. Most of them will run at 8 gigs, but they might run a little bit slow. And basically, for all the Forefront products, for Exchange, SharePoint, FIM, UAG, Direct Access, anything that you want to do, if you can't build up a proof of concept lab in your environment, download this. Run it up, find a machine, run it up, and it's a really good way of being able to test all the capabilities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in here. Again, I would have had these logged in before, but the other speaker ran over. See if I can make the screen resolution a bit better. Okay. So what I wanted to show you first was really the experience from a malware perspective of what the end user sees. We spent a lot of time with the capabilities really trying to work out what end users, what the experience should be. For instance, sometimes you will click on a link and it'll just sit there, and the browser will look, in effect, it will look stopped, but it's actually downloading the content and doing the virus scanning. So what we have here is we have our just have a website. We have a whole bunch of content here, fairly straightforward demos. This first one is a password encrypted document, and we go to click it, and you can see it's been blocked by policy because one of the policies is to block password protected documents. This option here is a large file, so what we do is we have a formula that works out how big the file is versus the bandwidth and the processing time and so forth, so we give the user a good experience. So when I click on this link, what it will do is it'll work out the how big the file is and everything like that. And what it's actually doing now is it's giving the user, a bit like the Hotmail if you've ever used Hotmail. So it gives the user an experience of, we're downloading this file, something's actually going on, and we're taking chunks. This is our, what we call our trickling. We'll look at that when we look at the console. And there we go on the files. You can download the file. The last one is really just the virus. These menu item or these error messages can be customizable, so you can put your own. They're all HTML, so you can put your own logos in. But it was just fairly quick demos just to show you the experience. Oops. If we jump back into my TMG box. For some reason when I start it up sometimes it doesn't have the start button. Well, let's try again. What we might do while we're waiting for that to log in is we might continue, and I'll come back to TMG when it's a bit happier. Layer 2 is URL filtering. This is pretty interesting technology in the way we've implemented that. What we've done with the URL filtering is we initially had one vendor, and we acquired their engine, we licensed their engine, and we're going to use that engine. So you might have seen, if you were using the TMG betas, beta 1 had some URL filtering in it, went away in beta 2, and came back differently in beta 3. That was because between beta 1 and beta 2 time frame, the company that we were using were acquired by a competitor, and we're trying to decide what we were going to do. So what we've actually done is leveraging the service, Microsoft Reputation Service. If you've used our email offering, you'll be familiar with the Reputation Service that provides a blacklist. What we've done is we've consolidated some vendors, M86, CloudMark, and there's another one, Bright Cloud, their URL databases. We've consolidated their databases. We've also consolidated the information that you get from IE8, from SmartScreen, all the information you get from Hotmail. So we get all that information and we correlate that, and we can come out with that is the Microsoft Reputation Service. So what happens on TMG when you install TMG is you get 85, I think it is, or 86 categories that you install, but you don't actually get a database, because the problem is obviously the database is fairly large and it's dynamic, and having the update traffic would be quite a lot of traffic. So the process that actually happens, an end user sitting behind TMG, they'll browse to whatever website.com. TMG will look up in its cache. If it doesn't have the categories for those URLs, it will then make a call to the Microsoft Reputation Service, and it will get categories back. Now, a site may be categorized in multiple categories, or might be listed in multiple categories. There is a blog post on the ISA blog about the priority orders. So, you know, if for some reason a site was categorized as maybe time wasting or bandwidth wasting and mail, there's a priority of which one goes first. So the categories come back to TMG, and then based on the rule set in TMG, TMG will make a decision on what to do, either to allow or deny, or in SP1, as you'll see, we actually can do a soft override now. We can inform the user that, hey, this really isn't business, business function data, and you can go to this site, but we're watching you. The other thing that we can do with URL filtering is not only will it allow us to do the categorization, but through the IE8 SmartScreen and so forth, we know that what links are loaded with malware. So what we can do is we'll also categorize links. It may be a valid site, but somebody might have put a piece of payload up there. So we can actually put a category in as malware for that site, and then it'll actually block that site as well. So we can do your standard acceptable use policy type categorization, but we can also protect users against malicious sites, so forth. And obviously the Reputation Service is in the cloud. There is a dispute page if you find a link. In fact, I had a customer in Australia that, funny story, the IT department, they had ISA and they wanted to migrate to TMG. So they're actually a brewery, and if you know a little bit about Australia, it's a brewery in Queensland called, and they sell a beer called Forex, and their URL was I think it was forex.com.au. They didn't actually test that URL. They had it all up and working. They went to the CIO and said, hey, look, this is great. We can save all this money. We can do all this thing. Really simple implementation. The first site he goes to is forex.com.au, and it comes up as blocked because it's a porn site. So as you can imagine, I got a call, and we're able to, there's a form on the Microsoft Reputation Service site that you can go in, and we put in, forex.com.au isn't a porn site, it's a beer site. So there is a process for going in the cloud and saying that you need some recategorization. There's also an override process in TMG itself. So we pretty much talked about this. We have 84 built-in categories built into TMG, and the MRS actually gives the URL to category. Once the category is downloaded into TMG, there's a persistent cache. It'll last through reboots and so forth, and then it'll next time that site gets looked up, then TMG will actually just get it from its cache. We talked about the admin can do the category overrides, you can do your own category queries and so forth, and obviously the logging and reporting, which we'll show in a minute. And we can have customizable rules for the end users. Again, With TMG SP1, we added some variables where you can actually give the user the category and the site and everything like that. So you can actually really customize the errors. In SP1, we have overrides. So we can have, this evaluate the policy impact and so forth. We can do category overrides. As you can see here, we'll show this in a minute. Basically, you can allow a user to visit a site, but they get an error message before they go to that site. And the user can do that manually. You can see the error message there. We'll show this in the demo. This information is also available in reports. So what you can do is you can print out a report that says this is the, I think it's the next slide. This is the top overrided users. So if somebody's continually going and overriding rules, you can actually go in there and have a look at what rules they are. So let's jump back, and my TMG box is a little bit healthier now. So we can see the screen. Okay, just. So for those of you not familiar with TMG, we have a couple of new options. The Update Center, it's where I mentioned that the updates, the malware inspection, network inspection, this isn't actually connected to any external network, hence why they're red. We've split out if you want to think of it like the forward proxy and the reverse proxy. So the firewall policy is everything. The web access policy is really just the web access control pieces. And you can see here in the tasks, we've got a whole bunch of tasks here. So if we go back and have a look in the malware inspection, because that's what we did in the first demo, we can obviously enable it or disable it. Destination exceptions, so if you have a site that you want or you trust, you can put that in there. We've added a few for you to start with that we think are trustworthy sites. Source exceptions, if you have a web service or an application that's going through your TMG, sometimes they have some traffic. If you don't want it to be malware inspected, smart hosts and smart apps and things like that, you can go and put the source exception in there. Or that option's always reserved also for the board members as well. Inspection settings. You can see here there's the block encrypted files. That was the demo. You can do that or not. A good way to get data in and out of organisations is to send it via an encrypted zip, so you can just block that straight away. Probably better ways of getting data in and out of your organisation than encrypted zips, so you can protect against that threat. By default, it will clean high and critical, but you can also block files with low and so forth. That's classified by our Microsoft anti-malware engine. There's also block files largest file size, archive depth 20, zip of death. People like to pack something 1,000 times and then send it to a mail server, and then what you'll do is you just get a denial of service because the thing will just sit there trying to unpack it and never actually scan it. So there's a whole bunch of settings there. License details. So this is different for TMG. So if you're familiar with ISA server licensing, you buy a server license, either enterprise or standard per processor. Fairly straightforward. When we move to TMG, the same capabilities you had in ISA are available in TMG, but the URL filtering and the malware filtering is part of a subscription license. That can be either standalone, it could be purchased in the Enterprise CAL suite, or the Forefront Security suite. So this is an additional subscription service. As you can see, you've got licensing details there for the subscription service. How often you want your malware engine to be updated? As a general rule, not a service level agreement and it's not a commitment, typically it's more. They aim, or our anti-malware group aim to put out a new engine at the minimum every 8 hours. So every 8 hours you should have a new engine. Obviously if something critical has been found or something like that, we'll push out a new engine. But in general you get 3 updates a day. Where do you want to store the temporary files when you've downloaded them? So here we have the content delivery. This is what I mentioned with the standard trickling and the fast trickling. When we clicked on the big file and it had the trickling bar that went across. So what you basically can go in here, you can check what options you want or what file types you want for that process notification in the slow trickling. So the slow trickling is just standard trickling. The content types for fast trickling, are all your media files and so forth. So there's actually a different algorithm on how they scan those files. So the malware, if you go and actually look in let's have a look in the allow rule. The malware inspection is enabled or disabled per rule. So you can go in and put it in per rule. It's obviously a global turn it on or off, but you can put it in per rule. Fairly straightforward. So looking at the URL filtering, what I'll do is I'll just go back to my client. So this scenario here, you've gone to a known good website, but somebody's hijacked this link, and it's actually going to take me to another site, and you block that site. Fairly straightforward. That's typical of what we see with the vulnerabilities today. This second one is the soft block. Again, this is the default error message. You put your logo and pretty it up, but you can customize this and put whatever error messages that you want in there, but the user has the option to click this box and override and go to their website. It's a really good sort of niggle thing for a user, and obviously that way they're aware that you're watching them. So if we go back and have a look at how that's implemented, have our URL filtering global settings, obviously enable it. Category query, when it's online, you can go in and punch in a URL and see what category comes back from the MRS or categories. You'll get multiple categories back. Category overrides, so you can come in here and manually override categories if you want to put a category override in there. And again, the licensing details that we've talked about. So it's fairly straightforward. From a perspective of that soft override rule, if we have a look in here, that's where our option is to do the it's a deny, but enables the user to do the soft override. So both boxes are checked. What that basically means is the override will be in effect for 5 minutes or until that user shuts that browser session down. The override will be available to that user. From a perspective of categories, again, this is our global block. You can see that we've added categories in here, so we've got category groups. If we go down to see here, if you're familiar with TMG, we had web listeners and server farms domain name sets. Now we've added URL sets, URL categories, and URL category sets. URL sets, we had that. You can go and punch your URLs in. URL categories, these are all the 84 categories that we have. What we've done is we've put them into a URL category set. So that's just a consolidation. You can make your own URL category set, which is probably what you would do and have that as your acceptable use policy. So these are the mandatory, you probably have a couple of categories. You'd have the deny saying absolutely under no circumstances are these sites allowed. The next level would be the soft override. These sites are allowed, Facebook, whatever, but you just want to inform the users. You don't want them to be looking at those sites. So that's the URL filtering. It's fairly straightforward. And that's the good thing about TMG is wizard-driven, nice and easy to configure. It's been really well thought out from a user interface perspective. HTTPS inspection. I call this the blue code feature. And the reason why I call it the blue code feature is because when I was selling ISA server and we only had ISA server, every time I would go and have a conversation with a customer and the first thing they said was, can you do HTTP inspection? I'd know the blue code sales rep had been there before because that's how they used to sell against it. Interesting though, it was sold as, this is the solution to world hunger, and we can protect all your traffic going out and everything like that. But when you actually boil down and look at what it's doing, you need to be really careful. As you know, TMG is an application layer firewall. It's got the HTTP filter, 4 lines of code, and you can get anything in the data stream out of the data stream into a log file on your TMG box. So if you enable HTTP inspection and put it on everything, anybody that goes to their online banking, their Facebook, whatever website, HTTPS website, they use a username and password, you're going to capture that information. Do you want to capture that information? Is that a legal liability for you to capture that information? That's a question, I guess, for your business. How I would implement HTTPS inspection, I would set up overrides or exceptions for the majority of websites, because all you're really trying to do here is block users having their own server at home or using SSL to bypass your security controls and sending that information. That's really the threat you're trying to protect against. HTTPS inspection globally is like a big hammer because you capture everything, and you don't really want to capture everything. So yes, we can do it. Understand when you implement it the risks to the business, your liability perspective. How would your CEO like to know that you can get his username and password quite easily off his access implementing HTTPS inspection? So the other thing is physical security on this box when you implement HTTPS inspection, because a rogue admin can get lots of information. And when we talk about how we've implemented it, it's done pretty well, but it relies on the users actually understanding what's going on. So be very careful when you implement HTTPS inspection. Why do we need it? Fairly straightforward. Right now, if we don't do HTTPS inspection and I browse to a secured website, that's an encrypted tunnel. And you can't inspect inside that. So I could be doing whatever I like inside that. The only way to implement this is really a man-in-the-middle attack. That's the only way to do it. If you're familiar with TMG and how we publish Exchange and SharePoint and so forth, it's basically that in reverse. So we set up a certificate on the TMG box, and we'll go into this when we do the demo. When the user browses to the website, TMG captures that. It sets up a secure channel between the client internal and the inside of TMG. Then it will do some certificate validation, and then it will go out to that site and establish another session. So in the clear within TMG, in memory, the data is in the clear and is able to be inspected for URL inspection, HTTPS inspection, NIST inspection, and everything like that. So what we have here is the ability to create some certificates on the TMG box. This is the really nice part of the implementation. If you've got Active Directory integrated machines as well, you can publish this certificate into the AD. So it's a one-click option versus having to actually go out and export and import certificates on your boxes. So it's quite a nice implementation. The other ability that we have is to do the validation. Some other competitors, the way they have implemented it, they haven't done any validation of the cert. They'll just bind to the cert and they'll create a session. What we actually do is we ensure that the cert on the site is valid. Matches. Does the friendly name match the actual name that's been presented by the website? Is the cert, has the cert expired? Is it by a trusted third party and so forth? We'll do that validation before we bind and create that SSL session. As I mentioned, group policy, the best way to deploy it, or you can do the old export, and we do again the validation, revocation, trusted expiration, and so forth. We do also have the option, and you'll notice that we now call the client, it's no longer the firewall client, it's called the TMG client. We use the TMG client to actually inform the user that that site is being inspected. The only other way, if you're not using the TMG client, is for the user to look at the certificate itself. Otherwise, if you don't use that client, the user doesn't know that there's HTTPS inspection going on. That's why we've implemented it in that. So let's have a look at HTTPS experience. So I browse to a HTTPS website, and normally, which it didn't do, there is a registry key that you can put in. It's hard-coded to only prompt the user every 12 hours. And because I tested this demo this morning, it's not 12 hours elapsed. But what happens is a little box comes up here and says this is a secure connection. If you actually go into the client, you'll actually see here that it was received a notification for that site and it's being inspected. So other than that, the only other way for the user to understand that they're being SSL inspected is that when you go and look at the certificate, assuming this was a certificate from a third-party site, it's actually saying this is a Forefront TMG certificate. So it's actually been generated from the Forefront TMG. So basically what happens is we generate a certificate on TMG, a validation, a publishing cert that then gets put into the group policy and into the trusted cert store. So if we have a look in the trusted store, we find there's a TMG certificate, and we'll show how that's generated when we go to TMG. So from a user perspective, they just go to an SSL website. You've got the TMG or the TMG client that pops up and says it's being inspected. If you don't have the TMG client, there's no way for the users to get an inspection there. There is a tool from Collective Software that you can use. It's quite useful. Anytime a user opens a browser setting, they get prompted with a window, do you accept this policy? So what you could do is use that add-on, it's a nice happy filter, use that add-on to actually say that this is what we're, go to our policy or whatever, so you can inform the users of what you're scanning. I haven't seen it, but it would be interesting if an employee was compromised in some way and they knew you were doing HTTPS inspection and they were to say, or a customer was arrested for something, an employee was arrested for something and they said, well, my machine was compromised or my account was compromised. How do you not prove, or how do you prove that you didn't do that? Because they can say, if they know you're doing HTTPS inspection, they could say, well, somehow, somewhere, somebody got my account. Believe it or not, that's quite often a defence. I do some work with the Computer Crime Squad back at home in Melbourne, and the number of people that say, hey, my machine was hacked, that's the typical #1 defence of people that have their machines compromised, is a piece of malware or something got on my box. To actually disprove that in a court of law is really hard. So that's why I'm saying understand your obligations and your legal liability if you implement HTTPS inspection in your organisation. So let's have a look at TMG. Configure HTTPS inspection, enable it. We have another option. We can not do the inspection, but we can validate the certificate. So we can have TMG validate certificates if we wish to do that. We can either import a certificate if you have your own certificate authority and you want to use that as the signing certificate, you can do that. Or we can use TMG to generate a certificate. I won't do that because I've already got a certificate generated. So we can see that the certificate, we saw that on the client, that was the certificate that we imported onto the box. And we have the option here, automatically through Active Directory. So we can click here and publish this into your Active Directory. It's really straightforward, and then when your clients get a GP update, they'll get that new trusted certificate as we saw in the Cert Manager. Or we can do a manual and you can export this and go around and do it on USB key. Obviously the AD option is quite straightforward. That's actually an interesting question too. One I get asked a lot by customers. Should I join my TMG to a domain? The answer to that is, if it's a forward proxy, so in a secure web gateway role, absolutely. Because it's on the inside of the network and effectively you've got your core firewall, an interface out of that going into the front of ISA, then an interface coming out of that going to the rest of your network. So it's effectively the start of your corporate network, at the edge of your corporate network. You can then take benefit of all the AD groups and policy users and groups and so forth. So you can add those groups to policies and policies within TMG. From a reverse publishing perspective, that's another story. The LDAP filter works really well. If you're doing certificate authentication, you need to have TMG joined to the domain. TMG is an EAL 4+ certified common criteria firewall. So you can have it joined to the domain and there is separation between the front and the back. It's really up to the scenario. But in the secure web gateway scenario, every time I would make it domain joined. Destination exceptions. So this is where you can go in and put your exceptions that you would have. So in the scenario that I mentioned, you would go in and put the online banking and those type of sites into your exceptions. And you can modify the exemptions to do validation yes or no. So you can actually, even though you're not doing inspection, you still can validate your exempt sites if you wish to do that. client notification, that was what was supposed to come up in the client from the TMG client. You just enable that. Certificate validation, check the CRL for revocation, block certs if they're not valid, block expired certs, so the certificate and also the name hashes. Source exceptions. Again, the executive option. You can also use this for smart clients and so forth. So this actually basically does no HTTPS outbound inspection. So if you've got a person that's saying, you know, need to access, they're the only person that accesses some site for some banking thing or something like that they do in the business and they can't get it to work, you can put that source in there. You know, it's a bit heavy to do that. I prefer to try and figure out why that site wasn't working with the HTTPS inspection. But if you need a quick fix, you can go and put it in the source exceptions there. From an implementation perspective, again, we have our actions, our protocols, from to. We've got our malware inspection, scheduling, and our content types. And the URL, sorry, the HTTPS, HTTPS inspection is enabled or disabled globally. Okay. Layer 4, Network Inspection Service. This would have to be one of the most useful capabilities of TMG for cleaning up garbage on your network. This works both for reverse proxy and the forward proxy scenario. Network Inspection Service, basically what it is a language. This came out of Microsoft Research. It was initially called Generic Application Protocol Analyzer, GAPA, which probably wasn't a really good name, so they changed it to the Network Inspection Service. Think of this as a way for TMG to understand what a specific vulnerability looks like on the wire versus having to do full correlation on IPS. What do I mean by that? So take Conficker for instance. The malware sensor or the malware team sit below me in level 5 in my office in Melbourne, and we have conversations with them. They're quite interesting individuals. They sit in hex editors all day. They tell me there's over 3,500 different variants of Conficker. You know, some script kiddie downloads it, makes his own patch, and so forth. So to actually find that from an antivirus perspective, you've got to have, you know, the behavioural monitoring, heuristics, and so forth, and understand, you know, signature-based and all that sort of thing. Whereas NIST looks at it from a different way. NIST looks at it from the vulnerability rather than the exploit. So rather than having to look at the 3,500 odd exploits, it looks for that one vulnerability. Because we know what specific actions Conficker takes to the code on the Windows code base, we can create a signature file for NIST. So anytime anybody tries to put Conficker either through TMG from the front or the back, we can detect that and we can block that traffic. So we have signatures for every Microsoft vulnerability that's been released. Every Microsoft security bulletin has a corresponding vulnerability, and we'll go and show this. So the benefit of this is that if there's a 0-day exploit and we push out a patch that is critical, well, what we can do, you're not going to be able to patch every device in your network, but if you're running NIST on TMG, your end users browsing the internet, if they click on a payload or something like that, they're going to be protected even though they don't have the patch on the box, because NIST on TMG is going to detect that at the edge. When the product group first started testing this, they this is sort of alpha, and they set it up in the lab. They were working on it and they got a hit on Conficker, and they thought, the first thought was, okay, there must be a bug in the code, but actually what it turned out to be was a contractor's laptop that was sitting on the lab network that was actually pushing Conficker out into the lab network. So by merely having TMG in that secure web gateway environment, you can actually detect who's doing what with the malware. If somebody comes into your network and puts a non-corporate laptop on the network or something and starts throwing Metasploit attacks or something, you can detect that. Just like coming in from the other way. So for instance, you might have SharePoint or Exchange or something like that. You might miss a patch on a front-end server. You might have 3 front-end servers and you might miss a patch. TMG is able to protect those servers from getting exploited. So what I'm going to show now So I'm going to go to my Cairo machine. This is a old exploit that was fixed a while ago to IIS. It's an ASP.NET exploit. So I'm telnetting into that support.fabricam machine. I'm out on the internet, script kiddie running, Metasploit or something like that, their favourite tool. Send some code. Let me just, where did that go? Oh, it's disappeared. If you briefly saw that, it said this has been blocked by IPS. So effectively what I've done is I've just injected some code at a web server trying to compromise that web server. If I go back to my TMG box and refresh my alerts, you can actually see here that NIS has detected and blocked that ASP.NET exploit. You can actually click on that link and it'll take you out to the knowledge base article that we have on that link. And that's, from a perspective of cleaning up your internal network, that's great intelligence, because you actually understand now what exploits are live and going on your network. Obviously they have to go through TMG to be detected, but really good intelligence of what's going on in your network. If we have a look at NIS in the configuration, as you can see, every let me just defocus that. Every bulletin has a corresponding vulnerability file. Let me just sort by that. And let me open my friend. Who can tell me what that one is? 0867. What were you doing about September, October 2008? Were you running around patching Conficker? So that's the Conficker MSRPC block for that. So straight away, putting TMG in your network, you're protecting your environment against any exploits, any payloads with Conficker and so forth. Really high value. I mean, it's simple to implement. From a NIST perspective, it's just on or off. If we go back to the web access policy. Oops, there we go. I lost it. So, exempt sites, how often you want to get the definitions, what do you want to do, default policies, and a protocol anomaly policy. So what we can also do is some more in-depth inspection. TMG does the HTTP inspection. We can do some more inspection on the anomalies, and we can block them as well. This does have, and it should be tested, because there are some interesting things that can happen to some applications, web applications, if they're not written properly. They can look like vulnerabilities, but they're not. So if you're using this to publish, SharePoint or Exchange or your own web app or something like that, put it in the detect only mode and just see what you hit. If you don't hit anything, then that's okay. Otherwise, if you do hit something, you need to go and have a look and inspect that. Just to finish up, TMG Service Pack 1 is out. A few enhancements. We've got a whole new reporting look and feel. One of the main pieces of feedback we get are the reports. We've added some new reports, user activity reports, so you can actually go in and inspect and have a look on the users and see what they're doing. There is a third-party tool. It's actually written in Australia by guys by the name of WebSpy. They have a really good reporting engine, and it has a plug-in for TMG, so you can get really good reports, and they do some really good roll-up information. By default, TMG now you can log to SQL reporting services, to SRS. You need to do a little bit of work. You need a DBA to get the schema out and to write your own reports, but it is possible to construct your own reports if you don't like the default reports. We talked about the user override. There's also the enterprise level override, so you can go in at an enterprise array level. For instance, let's say that you have multiple arrays. You might have a branch office scenario. You have an array for each branch office. Before, in TMG RTM, you had to go into each array and set the overrides for the URL, whereas now you can do it at the enterprise level. They've added that in SP1, Customizable error page I mentioned. You can now inform users of what they were doing wrong and where they should be going. Branch cache integration, so you can actually control and configure branch cache and use branch cache in TMG now. Really good from a branch environment, being able to configure that. As you know, you can create a TMG config on a disk, send it out there and configure up TMG site-to-site VPN, branch cache, and all that capability all in one. Read-only domain controller support. If you're familiar, who's running ISA on a domain controller in here? Nobody. Well, that's unfortunate. If you were running ISA on a domain controller, some people are on a multifunction box. In TMG RTM, it is locked. You cannot install it on a domain controller. It's not strictly supported on ISA, but it does work. There are some RPC issues on really busy boxes. But in TMG, it will hard block you installing on a domain controller. In SP1, you can now install it on an RODC. That's really good from a branch perspective as well, because a lot of branch controllers, or branch servers are read-only domain controllers. And we've added SharePoint 2010 publishing part of the service pack. So with that, we've made up a little bit of time, so I'll get you out for lunch. Session objectives: learn how TMG protects web users when they browse the internet. We've talked about the value of TMG, being able to consolidate your technologies down into one TMG box. We looked at some of the SP1 features, talked about the 4 layers of security in TMG, how we can have a consolidated and simplified web gateway, and we talked about competitive and how it's licensed. So just before, we talked a little bit about licensing. If you've got Enterprise Cal Suite and you've got ISA with SA, you already own everything I've shown you today. So you can implement this today and save some money by implementing that technology. So with that, thanks for coming. Please fill out your evals. I'm here to take question and answers. Otherwise, you go and get some lunch. Thanks a lot.